Hi everyone, this is Tom, and it's now 5 minutes to 7 in the evening. And you'll have to forgive me if my brain's a little bit slow or I stumble across some words. I've just finished a very long day. Started really early at 7 a.m. I was in a coffee shop blasting through my portfolio. I had to get a bunch of stuff done for my annual appraisal. Then I had to do a bunch of shopping, cooking, food prep. Then I spent the whole afternoon from about 12 in GP land, being a GP. So seeing patients and managing complex medical problems. So my brain's a little bit fried. But I thought this was a good time to reflect, seeing as I had my appraisal preparation to do and my day in GP, on the reasons I chose general practice. And I always recommend, we get loads of trainees coming through the practice. I always recommend considering general practice, particularly if you're ambitious, you like lots of stuff, and you share some of the same traits that I've got. So I'm not trying to persuade you with this video, but I'm giving you some ideas about why I chose general practice. So maybe you might consider it, because I think it's the best specialty. All right, so I got my list of eight reasons here. And I chose general practice after in my foundation year 2 job. Before that, I wanted to be a medical specialist and I was thinking about endocrinology. I also really like pediatrics. So these were the two things that I was thinking about. But it was my experience as a foundation year 1 doctor in the hospital and then moving to general practice. I was like, wow, this is me coming home. I am happy here and I'm going to stay here long term. So let's get into these reasons. Reason number 1 is that, see if this will focus, general practice covers everything. So what do I mean by this? Well, when you go through medical school, you learn the whole spectrum of medicine. So you do medicine, all the medical topics, surgery, pediatrics, obs and gynae, psychiatry, palliative care, all of these different specialties, dermatology, and the list goes on. And then you do your foundation training and you do more specific specialties. Then you go on to specialize. So what happens is you kind of get this thing where you start with no knowledge, you get a really broad knowledge, and then you lose that broad knowledge and become very specialized. I didn't really want to do that because I enjoyed everything. I loved learning, as you can probably tell from this channel. And whenever I learned a new topic, I wanted to absorb all the information about that topic and know more about it and then put it into practice. And if I had specialized in endocrinology, I would have ended up just running endocrine clinics day after day, seeing the same kind of stuff coming through and managing the same problems. I really wanted the variety of seeing a bit of everything, and general practice was the perfect solution to that. I also love teaching, as you could probably tell from these videos. And if you're going to teach medical students, if you're going to teach trainees, if you're going to teach any aspect of medicine, it's great to have a really specialist knowledge. But let's say you're 20 years into being a cardiologist and you know everything there possibly is to know about the heart and the management. That medical student who's coming up doesn't necessarily have the same interest in sort of like, ion channels within the muscle cells of the heart and how they respond to different types of calcium channel blockers, something crazy like that. They just want to know the really fundamental things that everybody needs to know, which is what a general practitioner will have at the tip of their fingers because they're managing that all the time. So the super specialist knowledge is not so useful when it comes to teaching, but having a general knowledge is much more useful. So when I was thinking, if I'm going to become a specialist, what shall I specialize in? Well, I want to specialize in a generalist field. So I've got the broadest amount of knowledge so that I can then use that knowledge to teach others. GP is perfect for that. And of course, you get great variety. When it comes to who's going to walk in next, what's this patient that I'm seeing next on my list going to present with? it could be almost anything as a GP. And if you're a specialist, the next patient coming into your clinic is probably going to have a similar problem to the last 10 patients in your clinic. There's not a lot of variety. Whereas in general practice, no day is the same, and you're constantly surprised by the weird and wonderful things that people come in with. So that's the first thing. It covers everything. Reason number 2 is the complexity. So this is the complexity of the presentations that you get in general practice. People think that the specialists get the complex stuff, but in my opinion, yes, the specialist gets the complex stuff, but there's so much complexity within an individual that you see in general practice. So when a patient comes in to see me and they say, oh, I've got headaches, actually those headaches on the surface, if you were, say, an A&E doctor or a neurologist, those headaches have a couple of things you need to rule out. You're an A&E doctor, so you want to make sure there's no bleed, there's no meningitis, there's no sort of serious things, and then discharge to the GP. If you're a neurologist, you are going to be looking for, is this a migraine? Is this a cluster headache? Is it a tension headache? Is it a brain tumor? Tick all those things off and then discharge. Whereas when a patient comes in to see me as a GP with headaches, I'm thinking about all the other aspects that are going on. So all their medications, could it be an electrolyte imbalance? Could it be stress? Could it be some kind of interaction with their drugs? Could it be any one of all those conditions that we talked about with A&E and neurology? So the complexity is there's a much bigger, broader range of differentials, and there's all the complexity of all the other conditions that are playing into it. So let's say that patient with a headache sees a neurologist. The neurologist says, no, it's not these conditions. I'm not sure what's causing these headaches. Discharge back to the GP. And then it's the GP's job to look more holistically at that patient and manage that complexity. So that's the complexity of general practice. Also, so many things in general practice are not clear cut. So when you refer to the hospital, you're saying this patient has a change in bowel habit, go to the hospital, exclude, inflammatory bowel disease or bowel cancer. They're going to have a colonoscopy, whatever it is, and then discharge back to their GP. That's kind of like a clear-cut symptoms, suspected diagnosis, management sort of pathway. In general practice, nothing is straightforward like that. It's very rare to get a really simple patient. Usually, it's a patient who's got like 5 different problems. They're all kind of equally important. Some of them may be really acute. Some of them may be long-term. You're not sure how they interact with each other. They've got this list of drugs. They've seen all these different people. They've got these blood results that are all a bit iffy. And you've got all these things you need to take into account. And you've got 10, 15 minutes to do that in an appointment. And you have to come up with kind of an idea of what's going on and an agreed management plan. On top of that, the patient has all these expectations. They have all these ideas. They may have some concerns they're not telling you about. They have a life outside of seeing you in their consulting room, and maybe they've got a sick relative, they're caring for somebody. So you've got so much complexity with every patient and such little time to really understand the patient and come up with a sensible kind of plan with them. And so this complexity adds such a challenge to the clinical practice. Really have to think outside the box and be creative, and not just think, if you're an A&E, somebody's coming with a head injury, you just go down this pathway, tick, 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 discharge. And so there's not a lot of complexity there. You're just kind of going through these tick boxes and the A&E pathway for head injury, and then they get discharged. As a GP, there's no checklist of tick boxes before you discharge the patient with all this complex stuff. You have to really think about the patient and come up with creative solutions like, well, let's review you in 2 weeks, or let's do this thing in the meantime, or if this happens, do this. And so this adds a real challenge to the process of managing patients. And I love that challenge. You may think that general practice is like an easy option. If you're not in the UK, maybe you're not familiar with general practice, GPs cover pretty much everything. It's very hard to get a specialist review. So if I want to refer somebody, it sometimes takes a year, sometimes 3 years to see a specialist. So most of the management is on me. And so I really need to know a lot of stuff. And so GPs are really specialist generalists. Whereas I think in a lot of countries, they're almost like a triage system to the specialist. It's a bit different in a GP. It's very much a different specialty. And so, in fact, when I teach GP trainees to get through their GP exams and through the GP course, the ones that struggle have been specialists, or ones that have been super specialists in the past really struggle to get through the GP stuff because it's so complex and there's so much to it, more than just this patient has a headache, do this, and then whatever it is. So reason number 3. Have I gone in a different order? No, that's just number 2. Reason number 3 is, you may have heard me say this before, single tasking. So this is something I've always struggled with, which is multitasking. I am terrible at doing 2 things at once. And if I get interrupted when I'm focused on a task, it takes me a long time to get back into that task. I can't kind of concentrate with interruptions distracting my focus. And so when I was in the hospital, I found this just an endless source of frustration, where you would start seeing a patient, your bleep would go off, you go pick up the phone, they want to do something, then the nurse hands you something, then you need to find a computer, somebody else interrupts this thing, the patient you were just seeing is still waiting for you, then there's a seizure across the ward, you have to go and deal with that. And it's just this constant barrage of distractions. And you never actually get anything done. It's so incredibly inefficient. And I remember when I was a surgical SHO and I was doing an on-call shift, which is like a 12-hour day. You carry the bleep, you take referrals from GPs, but you also do the urology ward round and the surgery ward round. And then you have to go and do all the jobs for those patients. And you get bleeped with referrals. And you're supposed to be seeing patients in A&E. And you're supposed to be seeing people on the surgical assessment unit. And I remember one day it was just awful. I got 65 bleeps in this day. It was so bad that I actually phoned the bleep people and said, how many bleeps did I get? And it was 65. So I'm taking these referrals. I'm supposed to be seeing these referrals. I've done the ward round. And the consultant wanted to do a second ward round in the afternoon. And this consultant was annoyed because this patient on the far side of the hospital from A&E, which is like a good, almost a 10-minute walk, this patient hadn't had their bloods done. And they were like, why haven't you done these bloods? I was like, I've been swamped the entire day. Every side of the hospital. I told the nurses they need the bloods done that morning, and the bloods hadn't been done. And I was like, this is just physically impossible for me to do all of these things. It just doesn't work. And he was like, I don't care, just get the bloods done. And at that point, I completely lost respect for that consultant, for one thing. I just realized, this is not the environment for me. Whereas, on a positive note, in general practice, you do tend to just do one thing at a time. And that's way more efficient. So even though it's just patient, and you might get between patients someone pop in your room with a query or a task or whatever it is, you can just complete one thing at a time. And if I'm doing one thing at a time, I could go super fast. I could get a lot of stuff done. But if I'm interrupted, I can't get anything done. So single tasking in general practice, focusing on a patient, solving their problem, then moving on to the next thing, is So much better suited to me than the hospital environment. Okay, on to reason number 4, which is control. There's kind of a couple of aspects to control and why this is important in general practice. The first one is that you're autonomous with your decision making. So this is actually in clinical practice. A patient comes in to see you, and because of the complexity, because no patient fits the guidelines, because no one fits a flow chart like they might do in A&E, they're a bit more complex. So you have control over the decision making where you make a joint decision with that patient, and you're not dictated to by a system. You are much more able to, come up with your own solutions. You feel like an actual doctor that's practicing, as opposed to, just being told, this is the pathway, fill in this form, do your job, kind of thing. So I really like that. You get to be your own, be the doctor that you think is the right doctor to be. And I think that's great. The other aspect is you have control over your career. So if I don't like my practice, I can leave and there'll be a GP job somewhere else for me. And I can negotiate with my practice and say, I would like to do this. Does that fit with what you want? And they can say no, or they can say yes. And so there's much more control over your career. And for me, this makes an enormous difference, even though the job is the same, and I'm not going to leave my GP job, and I love where I'm working, I'm kind of fixed in there long term. I'm going to be there indefinitely. But knowing that I have control and I've chosen that makes an enormous difference to me. As opposed to in a hospital job. So when you're a trainee, you just get told, this is your hospital, this is your job, this is your rota, this is what you're going to do, this is the only times you can take annual leave. There's no control, you're just told what to do. And that was like a big source of stress for me, really. And when I look forward, that was going to be the same as a SHO, as a registrar, and then even as a consultant, you have much less control, whereas general practice gives you that control. So, on to reason number 5. General practice is much more holistic. So when I see a patient in general practice, I'm looking at that person as a person and in the context of their life and their experiences and their various problems, their family life, their mood, their stress levels, their exercise levels, their comorbidities. I'm looking at the big picture. I'm also looking at their expectations and thinking about, why is this person here? What are they worried about? What do they want to happen? Whereas, so this is, I love this because I'm really into, as you could probably imagine, kind of psychology, human nature, how people think, what people's different personalities are like. I find that all fascinating and really interesting, and it keeps me engaged. In a hospital or a specialist environment, you're much more kind of, this is the problem, this is the medical issue, this is the solution to the medical issue. There we go, all done. Whereas I like that holistic approach. The other aspect is, let's say you don't know what to do with a patient, or they've been seen by the specialist, they've got abdominal pain, and they've seen the gastroenterologist, they've seen the surgeons, they've seen the gynecologists, and they've seen the urologist, and all of them have said, it's not a gastro issue, it's not a urology issue, it's not a gynae issue, but the patient still has abdominal pain. All these people have discharged them because they've not got a kind of a pill or a solution or a surgery or whatever it is to fix that person's problems. Whereas the GP, a good GP, will look at that person holistically and say, okay, we've got abdominal pain. This is a medically unexplained symptom. how are we going to manage this? Not just, doesn't have this problem, discharge, whatever it is. Let's creatively come up with a solution of how we're going to, how we can support you with this problem. I love that. Okay, number 6. We're getting there, guys. Number 6 is the environment and the team. So, I've never really liked hospitals. If you like hospitals, that's awesome. I'm not saying hospitals are bad, but personally, when I'm in a hospital, I feel like I'm at work. I'm kind of just drudging through it. And the whole way through, I never like being in the hospitals. They're always dreary. The lighting is bad. There's nowhere to sit down. There's nowhere to relax. It's very difficult to find a computer. There's these kind of computers on wheels or cows that are always broken. And the temperature is always wrong in the hospital. There's all sorts of smells. The patients are kind of packed in and they look like, they don't want to be there, which makes you not want to be there. You can never find anything. Go to a new ward and everything's different. You can't get through the doors because the codes are changed. All of these problems. There's nowhere to put your bag. All of these things are just kind of gripes that I have with the hospital environment. You do find solutions to it, but what I found as a foundation year 1 doctor was being in the hospital always felt a certain amount of tension, like I didn't want to be there. And then when I went to my GP job, which was my first general practice job as a FY2 doctor, suddenly it was like a weight was lifted. Like there's this lovely environment. The GP partners had put the effort into renovating the building. It was a nice place to be. The lighting was good. It felt airy and clean and tidy and well laid out, and you knew where everything was. And you arrived there and there was a clear place to put your stuff. You had your clinical room, which was like your designated room, your computer. You could log in. You got drawers where you could put your stuff, put it all away. And it was just kind of, everything was nicer. There's a kitchen. It's easy to get to. You can get teas and coffees. All of these things just make it slightly more nice to be in. And when you're going to be doing the job for like 30, 40 years, kind of want to be in a nice place. And then there's a team. So people think general practice is a lonely job, and to an extent there is some loneliness involved because you are in your own room all day. Although the benefit is the team is much smaller and you really get to know them well, and there's a much more continuity, whereas I see the same GPs, the same nurses, the same admin staff, the same secretaries, the same receptionists, the same dispensers week after week, and it's just and the same other clinicians and everything, and it's just really nice to catch up with people, get to know people long term, and really have that continuity, and so it's a nice place to be. Next one is leadership. So who runs a GP practice? Well, it's owned by the GPs. If you have a traditional GP practice where there's partners, so these partners own the GP practice, and then it's run by the management team who are in the GP practice. So if I have a problem, if some system doesn't work or there's some issue, I can go next door to the next clinical room where there's a partner sat there and talk to them about it. Or I can pop upstairs and talk to the practice manager or some of the other managers or whoever it is. This leadership team is right there and they're engaged. They know how everything works and they're interested. So if I come up with a solution and say, if we can do this, this could really make everything better, that'll make their lives better as well. They're invested. They're actually clinicians doing the same job as me. And so they will make the change and make it happen. You can make everything happen super quick. So in my FY2 FY2 job in general practice as a trainee, one of the GPs there was super into kind of business, innovation, making things happen, management, and so on. And he would make changes constantly, come up with new ideas, implement them, and make changes and improve things. And I was so inspired to see that. And it made me think, do you know what? In this environment, the leaders can make things happen. And if I said, here's an idea to him, and he thought it was a good idea, he could make it happen. And that was so cool. In the hospital, I had the complete opposite experience. I'll give you a story. When I was a FY2 doctor in the hospital, there was this awful IT system where you would, every time you prescribed a drug, it would come up with several warnings. And the problem was that the computer systems were so incredibly slow. Like, it would take sometimes 30 seconds to load each page. So you'd prescribe paracetamol and a warning would come up with something that everybody, who'd gone through medical school would know. And it would be something, so simple. And the warning would come up every single time you prescribe paracetamol. And you'd have to wait 30 seconds for this warning to load, click OK, and then wait 30 seconds for the next screen. And this would happen for every drug that you prescribed, which was costing hours and hours, or hours and hours a week of every single clinician's time across the entire hospital. And I went out and surveyed a bunch of junior doctors. The unanimous opinion was that this was completely nuts and it was completely affecting their ability to do the job. And I presented it to the management team, and the answer was, and I basically said, you can massively save money and time and improve everybody's working experience and patient care by just removing a bunch of these warnings. And it was a no-brainer, really, because the responsibility was on the clinician who was prescribing to know that basic information. But the answer was, but what if something goes wrong and we've removed these warnings? No, we can't do that. And the crazy thing is, the amount of harm that would have come from those warnings. It would be such a quick, easy fix, cost no money, and save so much time. And I just thought, this is hopeless. And then the final thing is that general practice is fast-paced. So you may think that working in A&E or anesthetics or surgery or something like that will be fast-paced and cool. But it's fast-paced in the sense that you get distracted and your attention is all over the place. But when it comes to getting things done, general practice is 10 or 15-minute appointments, one after the next, after the next, after the next. Task, prescription. Lots of single tasking individual things that keep changing. So there's so much variety, so much change, it's so fast-paced, and that keeps me engaged. In the hospital, there's always this process of see a patient and then spend the next 45 minutes writing up the notes, prescribing the drugs, blah, blah, blah. And you're stuck on that one patient. In general practice, you're never stuck on a patient for more than, say, half an hour if they're really complex. I hope that video was interesting. That's the end of the video. And I'll catch you in the next video, which will be tomorrow.